If someone does these three things, that person is not your friend. At my age, you stop being impressed by how many people know your name. You stop counting Christmas cards, birthday calls, and invitations. What starts to matter is something much simpler. When life becomes difficult, who stays? Who answers the phone? Who sits beside you when there is nothing exciting to gain from your company? That is the question I wish I had asked much earlier in life. I am an old man now. I've lived long enough to watch entire neighborhoods change, long enough to outlive people I thought would always be here, long enough to learn that friendship is one of the most misunderstood words in the world. We use it too easily. We call people friends because we've known them for years. We call them friends because we see them often. We call them friends because we've shared meals, holidays, and stories together. But time alone does not create friendship. Familiarity does not create friendship. And being surrounded by people does not mean you are loved. Looking back, I can honestly tell you that many of the people I once considered close friends were simply fellow travelers. They were companions during certain chapters of life. They enjoyed my company when circumstances were convenient. They enjoyed the version of me that was useful, entertaining, available, or helpful. But when life demanded something deeper, something costly, something uncomfortable, many of them quietly disappeared. That realization hurt me more than I like to admit. When you're younger, you tend to excuse things. You tell yourself everyone is busy, everyone has responsibilities, everyone is dealing with their own problems. And while all of that is true, there comes a point when patterns become impossible to ignore. If someone repeatedly takes from your kindness while rarely offering any of their own, eventually you must stop calling that friendship. That brings me to the first thing I want you to remember. The first sign that someone is not truly your friend is this: they only seem to appear when they need something from you. Now, I know that sounds harsh. Life requires us to help one another. Friends lean on friends. That's normal. But there is a difference between mutual support and a one-way street. For many years, I had a man in my life whom I'll call Richard. We met through work decades ago. Over time, we attended family gatherings together. We shared dinners. We spent countless afternoons talking about sports, politics, and all the usual things men discuss when they think they have forever ahead of them. Whenever Richard faced trouble, I was there. When his marriage was struggling, I listened for hours. When he lost a job, I helped him make connections. When his mother became ill, I drove him to the hospital more times than I can remember. If he called, I answered. If he needed help, I showed up. And for many years I told myself that was what friendship looked like. Then one year, my own life began to unravel. My wife was going through serious health problems. I wasn't sleeping much. I was exhausted, frightened, and carrying more worry than I knew how to express. For the first time in decades, I was the one who needed support. I remember calling Richard one evening, not because I wanted advice, not because I wanted solutions. I simply needed someone to talk to. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. He told me things would probably work out. He said I was strong. He reminded me that I had always handled difficult situations well. Then he changed the subject. A few days later, he called again. Not to ask how my wife was doing, not to see whether I was managing. He called because he needed help with a personal matter, and something inside me became very quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just quiet. Because for the first time, I saw the relationship clearly. I had mistaken reliability for friendship. I had mistaken my willingness to give for evidence that we were equally invested in one another. The truth was uncomfortable. Richard didn't see me as a source of support during hard times. He saw me as the person who could handle things alone. Many older people listening to me right now know exactly what I'm talking about. You become the dependable one, the strong one, the capable one. Everyone praises those qualities. They tell you how resilient you are. They tell you how much they admire your strength. But sometimes those compliments hide a painful reality. Sometimes people celebrate your strength because it frees them from any responsibility to help carry your burden. I learned that far too late. There is a sentence that sounds kind, but often isn't. You'll be fine. Now, certainly there are moments when those words are sincere, but there are other times when they are simply a polite exit, a way of stepping away from someone else's struggle without feeling guilty about it. The older I became, the more I noticed this pattern. Some people loved having me in their lives as long as I remained useful. They loved my advice. They loved my reliability. They loved my willingness to help. What they didn't love was being inconvenienced by my needs. That's a difficult thing to accept, especially when the relationship has existed for years, because we tend to believe that time equals loyalty. It doesn't. A relationship can last 30 years and still be one-sided. A relationship can last 40 years and still lack genuine care. Years are not proof of friendship. Character is. One afternoon, after my wife had recovered and life had become calmer again, I sat alone on the back porch thinking about all of this. I thought about every person who had stood beside me during difficult seasons. The list was surprisingly short, much shorter than I expected. But something else occurred to me. The people who had truly been there never made a performance out of it. They didn't give speeches. They didn't post about kindness. They didn't constantly remind me of what they had done. They simply showed up. They brought food. They made phone calls. They sat quietly when there was nothing useful to say. They offered their presence instead of their opinions. And that, my friends, is one of the rarest gifts a person can give. As I reflected on those years, I realized that the first sign of a false friendship is absence during your moments of need. Not occasional absence. We all have lives. We all have responsibilities. I mean a consistent pattern. A relationship where support only flows in one direction. A relationship where your value depends entirely on what you provide. Once you recognize that pattern, you begin seeing something else as well. You begin noticing people who leave you feeling strangely drained after every interaction. Not because they are openly cruel, not because they insult you directly. In fact, what makes these individuals so difficult to identify is that they often appear caring on the surface. And that brings me to the second thing. The second sign is much quieter, much more subtle, and in many ways far more dangerous than the first. The second sign is much quieter, much more subtle, and in many ways far more dangerous than the first. If someone consistently makes you feel smaller after spending time with them, that person is not your friend. Now notice what I said. I didn't say they insult you. I didn't say they scream at you. I didn't say they attack you openly. Those people are easy to identify. Most of us know when someone is treating us badly. The truly difficult ones are the people who make you doubt yourself while appearing perfectly polite. I spent years dealing with a woman I'll call Margaret. She was intelligent, charming, respected by everyone around her, and she had a remarkable talent for making every conversation feel like a competition without ever admitting there was one. If I talked about a project I was proud of, she would smile and tell me how someone else had done something similar, but on a larger scale. If I mentioned a new hobby, she would explain how complicated it was and how few people ever became truly good at it. If I shared an opinion, she would tilt her head and respond with, "That's an interesting way to look at it." Not necessarily rude, not openly dismissive, just enough to make me second-guess myself. Every conversation left tiny scratches, none of them serious on their own. But over the years, those scratches accumulated. One day, my late wife noticed something before I did. We had just come home from dinner with Margaret and a few others. I was unusually quiet. My wife asked me a simple question. She said, "Why do you always seem less happy after spending time with her?" I immediately defended Margaret. I said she meant well. I said she was just opinionated. I said she was trying to help. My wife listened patiently and then said something I never forgot. She said, "A person can mean well and still make your life heavier. Intentions don't erase impact." That sentence stayed with me, because the truth was, I had started editing myself around Margaret. I would rehearse stories before telling them. I would question my decisions before sharing them. I would anticipate criticism before it even arrived. Have you ever noticed yourself doing that around someone? Have you ever entered a room already preparing your defense? Have you ever changed your behavior because you knew exactly how someone was going to react? If so, pay attention. Your mind may be trying to tell you something your heart has been avoiding. Healthy friendships don't require constant self-protection. Real friends don't make you feel as though you are being graded every time you speak. A good friend may disagree with you. They may challenge you. They may even tell you uncomfortable truths when necessary. But somehow, after the conversation ends, you still feel respected. You still feel valued. You still feel like yourself. I was well into my 70s before I finally stopped giving so much power to people like Margaret. And let me tell you something. The freedom that comes from no longer needing another person's approval is one of the greatest gifts old age can offer. One afternoon, I stopped trying to impress people. I stopped explaining every decision. I stopped defending every preference, and the world became remarkably peaceful. Yet there was still one lesson left for me to learn, and in many ways it was the hardest one of all. It took me longer to understand because it hides behind smiles, compliments, and seemingly kind words. This is the third sign that someone is not your friend. If they cannot celebrate your happiness without immediately finding something negative to attach to it, they are not truly happy for you. I remember when my grandson received an opportunity he had worked toward for years. The entire family was excited. We gathered together, shared the news, laughed, and celebrated. Later that evening, I called an old acquaintance I had known for decades. I expected enthusiasm. Instead, there was a pause. Older people become very sensitive to pauses. We learn that silence often says more than words. After a moment, he said, "Well, that's good news. Let's just hope he doesn't get overwhelmed. Those situations can be difficult." On the surface, nothing seemed wrong. In fact, many people would call that a reasonable response. But what struck me was what he didn't say. He didn't celebrate first. He didn't acknowledge the achievement. He didn't share in the joy. He skipped directly to the concern. And suddenly, instead of enjoying the moment, I found myself worrying. That was when I started recognizing a pattern I had missed for years. Certain people always seemed uncomfortable when good things happened to others. They never openly objected. They never said anything outrageous. They simply found a way to dim the light. You buy a new home, and they mention how expensive maintenance can be. You achieve a goal, and they remind you how difficult it will be to sustain. You share exciting news, and they immediately point out the risks. Little by little, they turn celebrations into cautionary lectures. Now, I am not saying we should ignore reality. Of course, life contains challenges. Of course, success brings responsibility. But there is a time for analysis and a time for celebration. A true friend knows the difference. A true friend lets you enjoy your victory before discussing the obstacles ahead. A true friend feels genuine happiness when something wonderful happens in your life. They don't experience your success as a threat. They don't compare it to their own circumstances. They don't feel compelled to balance every positive moment with a negative observation. They simply celebrate with you. And that, my friends, is rarer than many people realize. As I entered my later years, I slowly allowed certain relationships to fade. There were no dramatic confrontations, no angry speeches, no grand declarations, just distance, quiet distance. I stopped investing energy where it was never returned. I stopped chasing people who only valued me when I was useful. I stopped seeking approval from people who made me feel smaller. And I stopped sharing my joy with people who couldn't genuinely celebrate it. For a while, my world became quieter. The phone rang less often. There were fewer invitations, fewer conversations. And yes, there were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake. But eventually I discovered something important. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. In fact, some of the loneliest years of my life were spent surrounded by the wrong people, and some of the most peaceful years have been spent with a small circle of genuine friends. Today, I have fewer friends than I did decades ago. Far fewer. But the ones who remain have proven themselves in ways that matter. They have shown up during difficult seasons. They have encouraged me without diminishing me. They have celebrated my victories as if those victories were their own. Their presence brings comfort rather than tension, warmth rather than doubt, peace rather than exhaustion. And at this stage of life, I honestly believe that is one of the greatest treasures a person can have. So if you remember nothing else from our conversation today, remember these three things. If someone only appears when they need something from you, be careful. If someone consistently leaves you feeling smaller after spending time with them, pay attention. And if someone cannot celebrate your happiness without finding a shadow to place over it, understand what that reveals. Life is too short, even when it has been as long as mine, to spend it carrying relationships that make your heart heavier. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to choose respect. You are allowed to surround yourself with people whose presence makes life feel warmer, simply because they are in it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate every minute you've shared here. Take good care of yourselves, take good care of the people who genuinely care for you, and never underestimate the value of a real friend. Until next time, my friends, goodbye, and may your days be peaceful and warm.